Welcome, everyone, to the 20th anniversary of the Winterset and Summer Literary Festival. I'm Noreen Golfman. I'm chair of the Winterset board, and on behalf of the board, I am very delighted to be able to greet all of you. Those of you who are here in the Beaches Arts and Heritage Center in beautiful Eastport, Newfoundland, and those of us watching virtually from near and far. The Winterset and Summer Literary Festival respectfully acknowledges the territory of the Eastport Peninsula on which we are gathering as the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk. We also acknowledge with respect the diverse histories and cultures of the Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit of this province. Now, before I say a word about our opening session, I wish to thank my predecessor, the irrepressible Kathy Hodder, for all the years of her steering the festival to this point. It's really been an honor to replace her as chair of the board. Anyone who knows Kathy well appreciates her diligent, no-nonsense, and good-humored way of just getting stuff done. I owe her an enormous debt of gratitude for going well beyond where a volunteer normally goes to make things just right. Thank you so much, Kathy. I also want to acknowledge and thank heartily Eleanor Dawson, who did so much to put this weekend's program together. Eleanor had her eye on the 20th anniversary program at least a year ago, and she pulled off what I hope you agree is a program worthy of special celebration. And of course, we wouldn't be here, I wouldn't be here, you wouldn't be here without our funders who have made everything possible. And so while we celebrate, we do lament the fact that Richard Gwynn, one of the founders of this festival and its chief enthusiast, friend, and mentor to so many of us, is no longer with us. I would like to think Richard's spirit is indeed with us this weekend, and that he would surely approve of the lineup of writers, conversationalists, and music makers who do comprise our program. We all miss Richard deeply, and we will forever be grateful to him for inspiring this entire annual event. And so it is, we kick off the festival this afternoon in suitable style with a conversation between none other than beloved CBC radio broadcaster, the man with whom we woke up every Sunday morning in this country for well over 20 years, a distinguished member of the Order of Canada, a giant of a man in every way possible, a longtime visitor to the Eastport Peninsula, a friend of this festival, the indomitable, wonderful Michael Enright. Michael is going to introduce his conversational partner, another giant, if not physically, certainly in all other ways possible, Margaret Atwood. Thank you so much, Michael, for being such a fundamental part of our festival. And so now over to you.
Thank you, Noreen. Margaret Eleanor Atwood, by any sensible measure, has to be the most famous writer in the world, certainly at least in the English-speaking world. Her every public utterance is flashed around the globe. Her books, poetry, and fiction are translated into dozens of languages, and she is featured on television. Her work is in movies and certainly all over social media. And an illustrious body of work it is. According to official Wikipedia account, she has written 18 books of poetry, 18 novels, 9 books of nonfiction, books of children's literature, 2 let me see, is that right? 2 graphic novels. And on top of all that, she has written an opera. Added to the body of work are the public appearances in conferences and literary festivals around the world. She has had a flourishing literary career since the early 1960s. Now, literary detectives, snoops, I call them, observers, journalists, and ordinary readers, I suppose, have pored over her work trying to find some hint of autobiography. She herself insists that none of her work, none of the novels, none of the poetry is autobiographical. I would guess in the last couple of decades, I've interviewed Margaret Atwood perhaps 24 times in various venues around the country. Once here at Winterset in the summer, that was a few years ago. She and her late partner, Graham Gibson, had a particular fondness for Newfoundland, its literature, its geography, its beauty, and of course, its people. This year, she is celebrating the Winterset in the Summer Festival remotely, as are we all. I had a Zoom conversation with her a week or so ago, in which she talked about a wide range of subjects. Her latest book of poetry, the nearness of death, the fact of aging, she is now 80 years old, and what we as a species are going to have to learn if we want to survive. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Margaret Atwood. Margaret Atwood, welcome back to Winterset in the Summer. The last time we were together, we were on a stage in front of an audience in Eastport, and now we're Zooming to each other.
We are.
Everything is different now, isn't it? I mean, it's not, you can't, for example, you can't reach out and hit me or
No,
throw a glass of water or any of that.
no, but I can throw a virtual glass of water.
That's right. You're very adept at this, aren't you? You're very technologically astute. You know what you're doing at every moment. But because of the pandemic and the COVID, the last year and a half, does it now mean that we have to calibrate the arc of our lives pre-pandemic, post-pandemic? Is that where we're headed?
It is amazing how quickly people forget pandemic experiences. So when you go back to the 1919 flu, which was devastating,
Right.
really horrible. People were dropping dead on the street, blood was coming out of their ears, and a lot of people died, like lots and lots. And they did not have the tools that we have now for testing, for developing rapid vaccines, and it was devastating. But if you look at the literature produced after that, nobody mentions it. You got the roaring 20s, but nobody said, oh, remember the 2 years we were having the flu pandemic. So already we're opening up again. People are eating in restaurants again. And it won't be a complete return to, because time doesn't go backwards. And we will keep those things that we have found very useful. I don't think the age of Zooming is over by any means, because it does allow you to reach a wider audience, but people will not feel anymore that they are locked out, that they can't move, that they can't do the things that they do, socialize with other people. They'll go back to that pretty rapidly. Kids who grow up to be writers are going to have that in their novels somewhere, but they probably won't be novels in which the whole thing takes place during the pandemic. But what do I know? I won't be writing those books. Somebody else will.
How, personally, how have you survived? How have you gone day to day with the lockdown and all of the attendant
The stuff.
closure?
Yes. Yeah, all that stuff. So what do writers do normally anyway? They're
alone most of the time.
They sit in a room and talk to people who aren't there. So what's different? So that part of it, I think writers probably had a better time adjusting than a whole bunch of other people. The ones who really had a hard time were public performers, such as musicians, such as singers, such as actors, because all those things closed down. Even if you were in a television series, there were ways of handling that.
Yeah.
You could lock down the set, you could test everybody every day, you could shoot the scenes, and people did that. But the public performers giving concerts, they really had a terrible time.
what is going to be the impact of that? Because if you look at, there have been stories in the various newspapers and magazines about the complete collapse of popular culture, of public culture,
Didn't
opera,
collapse completely.
say again?
It had a hiatus, but it's not gone. It will be back. And some new forms were created. For instance, Against the Grain Theater, which usually did an in-person Handel's Messiah every year,
Right.
couldn't do an in-person one. So they did this amazing thing, which went all over the world, in which they had 6 languages. They translated it into indigenous languages. They sang it in French. So 6 languages, and every province in Canada, they had a singer in it doing one of the arias. The Trumpets Will Sound, for instance, was sung in a hockey arena.
Oh,
It was great.
that's wonderful.
So, up in the Arctic, out on the West Coast, and they had, I think, several different choruses, and the Toronto Symphony, and they spliced it all together into this gorgeous, visually stunning Handel's Messiah that they put out over the internet, and they got, tons and tons of views of that, and people thought it was gorgeous. So that's a new art form.
Did you write every day?
Do I write every day
No,
anyway?
Did you during the
No,
pandemic?
no, I cannot tell a lie. I did not. But I don't write. I don't write it every day anyway, Michael.
Mhm.
I mean, I write something, grocery shopping list. But was I writing, some epic or other? No, I was not.
Were you afraid at any point, or hesitant at any point, of going out into a public space, or those few stores that were open, or the transit, any of that?
I was cautious. I was also strictly controlled by the younger generation, who were saying things like, "You can't do that," and "No, you are not allowed to climb out onto the roof." Things like that, stuff like that. But I got a certain amount of that anyway. But you, Michael, you actually had a brush with the Grim Reaper.
I had COVID, yes.
You did. How did you get it? Do you even know?
There's it's some dispute. It might have. I was in the Toronto General Hospital for a
Oh, that's right.
surgery, and there was an outbreak in the OR department. I could have gotten it there.
I think you probably did.
Anywhere.
Yeah.
And it's quite scary. Actually.
Very scary. Yes, I was getting bulletins from your son.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. It was.
Once you were fit to be seen.
What was the biggest, not the biggest, but the most telling thing that you missed in that year and a half?
Let's see. Well, I would say just going out to a cafe, with people, just having a casual 3 coffees. No, what am I saying? A casual coffee or 2.
You brought out the book of poetry in that time called
Yes,
Dearly.
I did.
And it's your first book of poetry in 10 years, right?
That's usually what happens.
Well, these are poems written over 11 years.
Yeah.
2008. And they're unlike any of your poetry that I've read before, in a sense that they are darker.
Well, I wouldn't call them darker. I would call them, I'm older.
And that comes, well, you said in the intro, you say that the world has grown darker and you have gotten
It has,
older.
yeah, but we saw quite a lot of that. So we saw, for instance, what happened right after the Biden election.
Yeah.
But my book was already out by then. But we saw the Trump years. Things got pretty scary if you happen to think that democracy is the preferable form of government. So darker in that way, yes. the climate change crisis is upon us. It's no longer going to be 50 years from now. It's now.
It's not an abstraction anymore.
No, no, well, it never was, but people could
Yeah.
think of it as that. So all of those things are concerning, but no reason to give up. In fact, a very good reason not to give up.
The title of the collection is Dearly.
Hmm.
Why? What does that mean?
Well, here's what you do when you're putting together a book of poetry. I have this drawer that's right over there, and those are the poems, and you get them out and you work on them, and then you pick the ones that you think should be in the book, and then you lay them out on the floor like a deck of cards, and you start arranging them. And I don't like even numbers, so my collections always have an odd number of sections.
Right.
And then you look at all the titles and you think, what would be a good title for this book? So that is the title that I chose. It's the title of one of the poems.
It's one of the. But is it something that you present dearly to an audience, or is it? Where does it come
Well,
from?
dearly is an odd word.
Yeah.
So we don't use it much anymore, but it used to be standard in things like dearly beloved, we are gathered here together.
Sure.
And in 19th century literature, I missed her dearly. I grieved dearly. It was a word that was often used and isn't much used anymore. So the poem is partly about words that used to be used quite a lot and aren't anymore. Language changes, it's always moving on, but sometimes you bring back words because then they will have a new meaning in the new context.
Wallace Stevens argued that you don't have to worry about meaning in poetry, that the words count more than meaning.
Well, words contain meaning. I don't know what he's talking about.
Yeah.
I think what he meant was that, and someone once said, take care of the sound and the sense will take care of itself.
Right. Right.
And that's important in poetry. But sense counts too. So you can have a great sounding word that doesn't make any sense in that poem.
You say in the introduction that poetry deals with the core of human existence, life, death, renewal, change, as well as fairness and unfairness. Doesn't the novel do that as well?
Sure, why not? But not, the novel is it's a real grab bag. And probably we need a number of different terms to talk about different kinds of prose fiction, because not all of them are the realistic novel of the 19th century.
Yeah.
So once it's got werewolves, hate to break this to you, Michael, it's not realism.
But you were a poet before you were a novelist.
No, that's not true.
No?
I started writing everything I still write when I was 16, 17, and I was writing prose fiction at that time too. It's just that in the 60s, it was easier to publish poetry. In fact, it was a lot easier to publish poetry and quite hard to publish a novel if you were a Canadian in that decade, because the audience wasn't there yet. So the poets were churning out their little chapbooks of poetry on offset printing, mimeograph machines, handset type, which is what I did. And nobody was selling very many of them because, as I said, the audience wasn't there yet. But it was easy to do, whereas novels are long. They've got a lot of pages.
Yeah.
You just kind of crank it out yourself. You needed a publisher, and that's why we started these publishing companies, first for poetry, but then pretty swiftly for prose fiction. Because in the 60s, there were very few publishers in Canada. The only one that was really specializing in Canadian was McClelland and Stewart.
Stewart, yeah.
And it was hard to get a novel published then.
going through the book and then going over it again, certain phrases, certain scenes are real stoppers. I kind of catch my breath and go back and look at it. One of them is the poem, "If there were no emptiness, there would be no life."
True.
And that stopped me. And I explain that for me. If there's no emptiness, no life.
Okay, so there you are, you're talking to me, you're in a room. Okay, and there's space around you. What if there were no space around you? What if all those books and stuff that I see were all crammed up right against you? You wouldn't be able to move, and pretty quickly you would be no longer in a living condition. So one of the things that happened with the origin of the universe was expansion, space.
Right.
Space for things to move around. And we all have enough emptiness, unless we're underground and a lot of dirt is falling down on top of us. We all have a lot of emptiness to move around in. It's not really empty, of
But
course, there are atoms.
Doesn't that suggest something, obviously something missing, but a kind of bleak existence? He has such an empty life, or there's the long periods where she doesn't connect with anybody, or that
Well,
kind of
that's a different kind. I'm just talking about the physicality.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're in the habit of seeing that word empty as a negative, but there's a way of seeing it as a positive, just as you can take the dark light dichotomy and say, without darkness, no light. So think of how horrible it would be if it were daytime all the time.
And without evil, there's no good. Is that the idea?
Or without good, there's no evil.
That's the Manichaean. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
So
so we
read.
do tend to think in two boxes, and it isn't always two boxes. There's a lot of gray areas, but certainly without darkness, no light.
Yeah.
And I'm not the first person to have said that. Lots of people have said it too.
This is from Winter Vacations. How quickly we're skimming through time, leaving behind us a trail of muffin crumbs and wet towels and hotel soaps like white stones in the forest. Skimming through time, you're now entering or are in your 80s. Is it scary?
No.
No.
No. Next question.
What?
I think it's scarier when you're 25. So you look at old people and you think, oh my God,
Yeah.
I certainly don't want to turn into that decrepit wreck. But when you're actually there, you can have a pretty good time.
Would you rather be 25 again?
I would rather not be 22 again. 25 wasn't bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think 21, 22, I could skip that. How about you?
I'd like to be 40 again.
40 wasn't bad.
Not bad at all.
No,
Yeah.
50 was pretty good.
Well, you and I came through the 60s and all of that. And it disappeared in the 70s.
Well, I don't know how old you are, Michael. But
78.
Yeah, so I'm older than you. I was too old to be a hippie.
No, really?
Yeah.
You hung out with hippie. You hung out in Yorkville. You
No, I didn't. I was
went to the coffee houses.
No, I didn't. Basically, I wasn't in Toronto at that time. I was at Harvard. I was in Montreal.
Yeah.
I was in Vancouver. I was in Toronto in '63. I worked in market research that year.
How did you avoid being a hippie?
I was too old. We were the work ethic 50s. So you probably just missed that, Michael. You're probably just old enough to have been a hippie. It's a kind of slightly aged hippie. Did you have love beads, Michael? Confess.
No, but I wore sandals without socks to
Well, I'm
school.
glad you didn't wear them with socks.
But that's-
Yeah, so essentially we were existentialists. So we were hanging out in coffee houses in about 1960, reading our bad poetry out loud on poetry night, but no hippies had appeared yet. They came along in 68
yeah.
or so. So
But you weren't caught up with Allen Ginsberg and Gregory Corso.
well, I knew about them, sure.
Yeah.
But I wasn't of them. I wasn't going, cool, man. So we just thought people of my generation tended to think hippies were lazy.
But all right, when you saw Howl, for example, it came
Yeah.
out, City Lights Press from San
Yeah,
Francisco,
yeah.
did it have an impact on you?
What do you mean by impact?
Did you say to yourself, this is breaking new ground? This is a whole new dimension for poetry.
No, it didn't. Sorry.
It had no impact on you
Well, I don't know whether,
or influence.
what are you trying to pin me down? You're trying to make me into a hippie, no matter what I say.
No one could do that, Margaret.
Yeah, I don't think so.
But that work and
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting, but it was also American. So, so very, very interesting in that context. And as I was a student of American Romanticism, I could certainly see the connection between Whitman and Howell. There's a direct connection. But did it change the way I wrote poetry? No.
no.
It didn't. Did it change my terms of reference? Not particularly, because what we were doing in those years was trying to make a space where we could even be published.
One more question about Dearly. You say in the introduction that there are many more birds in this volume than usual, and you hope there are more birds in the next volume if there is one, and we know there will be. But there's a poem called Fear of Birds.
Mm.
And it resonated with me because my mother was afraid of birds.
Was she?
Ornithophobia, I guess.
Yeah.
If we were walking down the street and there were
Mhm.
pigeons on the sidewalk, we'd cross the road. She'd
Oh,
drag me across.
That is severe.
Where does
What?
it come from?
I don't know. What was she afraid they would do to her?
It wasn't a fear of being attacked, I don't think. It was just that they're so alien to her that she doesn't know how to cope.
Oh, so they are the descendants of dinosaurs.
Yeah.
And they do look at you with these birdie eyes. On the other hand, some of them are very smart. So ravens, for instance, are highly intelligent. But of course, if you have a fear of birds, you don't care about that. You just don't want them anywhere near you.
The first time I was ever in northern Canada, in Yellowknife, I was told never eat food in the open because the ravens will attack.
Oh,
for the hot dog or the Big
well, they will
Mac.
try to get it from you, but they probably won't attack you.
No,
No.
they just want the food.
So I heard a great story about a raven. Woman who had a farm in the northerly location. A raven appeared and sat on the fence and tried to attract her attention. So she went over to see what it was, and this raven had a bunch of porcupine quills stuck into it that it couldn't get out itself. So she went and got some pliers, and it allowed her to pull these quills out, which would have killed it had she not done that, because you know they have little barbs on them, they work their way in.
That's right.
And after that, it was her friend for life. It used to bring her little presents, recognized her, and it knew enough to know, because it had probably seen her working with animals, it knew enough to know that she could help it out. Is that clever or what?
And the raven responded to her and
well, it wanted her to come and get the quills out. It knew what it was asking for.
I can't, we have to talk briefly about Handmaid's Tale because it's become, and desperately trying to avoid the word iconic, but it's been everywhere. People know it. It's one of those things that if people haven't read it, they say they've read it or they've seen it or whatever. You told somebody when you were writing it that it scared you.
Yeah.
How so?
Well, to me, and not to some people at that time, but to me, because I did study American history and literature from the get-go. I had to. It was one of my gaps that I had to study in order to do the 5 exams that you needed to do at Harvard. So it was too plausible. Maybe not the outfits, but the attempt to turn the United States into a theocratic dictatorship was a little too plausible in view of the history beginning in the 17th century and going on. So that element of 17th century American theocracy never totally disappeared. It's come up and down over time, but it's never gone. And it's always one of the elements in the soup mix, and always has a chance of becoming ascendant again.
You've always said to me on many occasions that you don't prophesy the future. You don't kind of define the future. Yet you've been called by the New Yorker, for one, as a prophet of dystopia. And people are saying now, because of the rise and fall of Trumpism, that what the novel did, and the subsequent iterations of it in television and so on, is extremely predictable. That what you suggested would happen has happened.
Well, not quite, because they didn't win.
Yeah.
So in my view, we came within 3 minutes of having martial law and a dictatorship in the United States. So had a Congress person been shot, martial law would have been declared, and that would have been that. With the only hope residing in the military, who do swear their oath to the Constitution, not to an individual. Anyway, I was pretty horrified by that whole thing, and I think it was a near miss. So in The Handmaid's Tale,
Yeah,
succeeds, right?
Somebody wrote, a pundit, American pundit named Charlie Pierce, wrote a column in which he said the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, should be paying you royalties.
Really? For
because he's inactive. So maybe we get a check from
using the playbook.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, it is a playbook. You know, the dictatorships are all very similar, of left or right. And no matter what they say their slogan is or what their reason for being is, they all follow a pretty similar pattern. And a lot of people have written about this, including Timothy Snyder, including George Orwell, Once Upon a Time, including Evgeny Zamyatin, who wrote one of these seminal dictatorial dystopias called We, to which I've just written an introduction. So he saw Big Brother coming. He saw Stalin coming, and he put it into this 1923 novel called We. But it's not that different from some of the histories of Roman emperors, some of the histories of some of the worser kings of Europe. So you get power through some sort of chicanery, bloodshed, assassination, or what have you. You then eliminate your enemies while telling everybody that it's for the greater good.
How
fill in the blank of what you think the greater good is.
Yeah. How much do you read in a week? You've seen, I mean, your range of reading. Would you spend hours a day, or how?
Oh, several hours a day for sure.
The capacity of
Yeah, but I'm
Really?
the reading generation. So when I grew up and where I grew up, there wasn't any. So I grew up in the north. I had no access to cinemas. There wasn't any television yet. No radio much up there. No electricity, and therefore there were books. So I was an early reader. I read a lot. I continue to read a lot.
But do you find, as I do, my attention span has shortened because of social media and the internet?
You need to turn off your devices, Michael.
That will do.
You shouldn't be on screen time before going to sleep. You'll get
Right.
more sleep that way. Yeah, so reading, on the other hand, can cause you to zizz off quite easily.
Given the fractured audiences and all of the different things that impinge on our imagination. As a novelist, you've used the phrase speculative fiction,
Yeah.
which I always assumed was science fiction.
So 1984 isn't science fiction. I think we'll agree on that.
Yeah.
No spaceships, no technology that
Ray
was
guns.
already available to him. Television had already been invented by that time. Did you know that? In fact, Hitler thought that he would use it in the 30s, but the problem was that, and he thought he would put television screens in movie theaters, and people could then watch his rallies live, et cetera, et cetera. But the trouble was that it shrank him. So there was this little weenie Hitler going, and it looked stupid. So he nixed that and went back to newsreels on great big screens and live rallies. Anyway, so Orwell was just using 1984 was called that because it was 1948 backwards. And he was doing
1984.
Yeah, he was doing Stalinism. He was doing Stalinism if it were in England. Okay. But that's
Right.
not to my, it's futuristic, it's a dystopia, but that's different from science fiction proper. However, you can make a great big banner across the top and it can say Wonder Tales. And that would be everything that is not Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice and Vanity Fair and Emma and Charles Dickens, except for Christmas Carol, which is not realistic. I hate to break this to you. So Wonder Tales. Under Wonder Tales, you can have ghost stories, vampires, werewolves, Frankenstein, early science fiction, and you can have Jules Verne, who, however, was writing only about things he felt could really happen, like submarines, going around the world in a balloon, stuff like that. And then on the scene arrives H.G. Wells with two amazingly influential works. One of them was called The Time Traveler, and the other one was called War of the Worlds.
Right.
And that changed everything. And Jules Verne was horrified. And he said, Mais il invente, but he's making stuff up. So we had Martians, we had traveling in time, we had stuff that we hadn't had before like that. We'd had, for instance, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which is a werewolf tale, but with chemistry. So all of these are wonder tales, but there's a difference between stuff that could really happen and stuff that isn't going to happen at all. Like,
what were the wonder tales that ignited your imagination as a young girl?
I read them all, every single one. And,
the first book I read was Treasure Island.
Yeah, that was good. Yeah, it's very well written.
Yeah.
And it has a wonderful story of how it came to be written by Robert Louis Stevenson. And the story goes like this. Robert Louis Stevenson was at a very low point in his life. He'd written 3 novels. He'd burnt them up in the fireplace because he thought they weren't any good. He was living with his parents. He was already grown up. He had a cough. Things weren't good. But then a young visitor came. And this young visitor, who was a 12-year-old boy, liked to paint. So Robert Louis Stevenson painted with the young visitor. And one day he painted a map of an island. And they decided together that it should be a desert island and that it should be an island where some pirates had buried some treasure. So they put those things on the map and they named them. And then the young visitor said, well, what is the story of how the treasure got to be there?
Yeah.
So then he starts writing Treasure Island. And as you know, in the very first chapter, there's a map. That's the map.
That's right. Yeah.
So then he starts reading it out loud to his family group. And they said, this is really good. We want you to go on writing it and tell us what happens. So he writes up to the point where they're stuck in the blockhouse. Remember that?
Yeah.
Stuck in the blockhouse. And then a friend of his, who's a publisher, comes to visit and says, this is really good. I want to publish it. And Robert Louis Stevenson immediately gets blocked in the blockhouse. He's so terrified by the idea of actually having this book published. He can't write anymore. But then he gets unblocked. He gets them out of the blockhouse, finishes the book, sends it off to the publisher with the map, which the publisher loses. So then he has to recreate the map. So the map that actually goes in the book is a recreation of that original map that kicked the whole thing off. Isn't that a great story?
Have you ever
violent success?
Have you ever embarked on a novel, gotten a quarter of the way through or halfway through,
more than that,
and realized this isn't going anywhere?
Absolutely.
Guy Vanderhaeg said that he's done this a number of times. Have
Yes,
you done that?
Yes, absolutely. And I know in each case why it didn't go anywhere. And the first time I was trying to be organized and like a proper novelist.
Right.
Be organized, right? A mistake in my case. It's no good. So I got these filing cards. Okay, and I was going to have 8 characters. Number 1, that's too many. And each one of them was going to have a part in each of 5 sections, making 40 sections. So I arranged them all on these filing cards and I started writing through this scheme, and I got through it twice. And we knew a lot about each one of these people. We knew what they had for breakfast. We knew their kind of socks they had, and, you know, about their mother and their breakfast and stuff like that. But 200 pages had occurred and nothing had happened. And I was not Samuel Beckett, you know, I could not make nothing happening interesting.
Right.
So I thought, this is not happening. So away it went. I think I've rescued 1 sentence out of it.
Sure.
Yeah, that's but there you go, a learning experience.
Joe Didion says that style is character. Do you agree with that?
I don't know what that means.
I guess it means that the outward appurtenances of somebody speaks to that person's character.
I thought you meant the style of the writing.
No, the style of the person.
Style of the person. Well, in that case, she agrees with John Ruskin, who said a similar thing. He said, tell me what you like and I will tell you who you are.
Right.
So in the age of aesthetics, your decor bespoke you. So this would be the Oscar Wilde view of life.
It's all, Alec Guinness once said that when he creates a character, he starts always with the clothes.
Well, I'm very keen on clothes, and I do dress my characters. I pay quite a lot of attention.
Yes, yeah.
I also pay attention to what they're eating, but some writers don't at all. They just assume that, you know, they eat off stage. we don't want to see them doing it. So Dashiell Hammett, they drink and smoke a lot, but I don't think they eat anything.
Yeah.
I think they ever eat. Raymond Chandler is very good on furniture. Furniture, ladies' outfits, he's good on that. The little evening bag with the pearl-handled revolver in it, he's good on those things. So it just depends on what sort of writer you are, and what sort of, so Jane Austen puts in the outfits quite a bit, but more in her earlier work. She puts in the conveyances, like like what is taking you where you're going. So in our age, that would be what kind of car you drive.
I don't think, just to pick up on something you said, I'm not sure anybody can accurately tell what kind of writer you are, because of the infinite variety, to quote somebody, and the range of things that attract you and that you write about. You're very hard to pin down in a way.
Well, there's a number of things I can't do, so we can exclude them right away. So I'm no good at dragons. Can't do dragons. You seem appalled.
No, I had never thought of doing dragons.
Some dragons are very good.
But look at, you've written opera, stage plays,
A bit, yeah.
screenplay, poetry. You have a piece in a recent issue of the New Yorker about learning to drive a car, which surprised me. I thought you were a driver from age 16, but you nearly killed yourself learning.
But I nearly killed other people learning.
Well, that. But to take something as mundane as that, and to create a kind of sense of oneself is, I don't know, it's pretty remarkable. I don't think I could, I mean, I learned to drive when I was 14.
Lucky you.
But I don't think I could write about it. I wouldn't talk, you know,
You weren't supposed to be doing that, Michael.
No, I know. My mother taught me to drive at age 14.
Did you run into anything?
Not until years later. Then I ran into something. But the piece in the New Yorker is, it got to me, it's rather poignant, because the reason you learned to drive was because of something that happened to your partner.
Yeah, it's Graham got bitten
Gibson,
by our dog. Yeah.
who
So we have a
died.
very large Irish wolfhound.
Yeah.
Well, they are very large. So with their paws on your shoulders, they're taller than you. And they're lovely dogs, but it tried to jump a wire fence. He got his legs caught in the wire. And of course, Graham went with the wire clippers to snip him out. But just as a person in pain grabs onto the nearest thing, a dog in pain grabs onto the nearest thing, which happened to be Graham's head, with his mouth, and just missed Graham's jugular vein.
God.
So because I didn't know how to drive at that time, Graham had to drive himself to the hospital, which was 20 miles away with the blood pouring out.
Staunching the blood, yeah.
Oh yeah. So I thought, okay, that's it. I'm learning to drive. So having had a couple of failed attempts earlier, I then did it professionally with this quite calm but gum chewing instructor. Chewed very fast when you were making him nervous, and slowly when you were doing okay.
Dearly is the dedication is to Graham in absentia, which is, I have trouble thinking that he's gone, because to me he was one of those indelible characters that their presence carries on. I'm not making much sense.
There's no, I know exactly what you mean, and there's no doubt of that. So yes, he did have a very large presence. And yeah. Our friend, yours and my friend, plus Graham's friend, Larry Gaynor, was a similar kind of individual. And everyone has somebody like that in their life if they're lucky. So yes, we don't think of him as exactly gone. We think of him as still present in our lives, but just not in exactly the same form.
Some of the conversations that we had over the years suggested that Graham was not terribly optimistic about humankind and how we're going to behave in the future and how we're going to try and save the planet or something. He didn't think we were going to do it. We had the will to do it.
Yeah, but that didn't stop him from trying.
Oh God, no.
So that was his work with BirdLife International.
Yeah.
That was his work with Penn, which worked on behalf of imprisoned and exiled
Yeah.
writers who were in trouble for stuff they had written. So all of these things are rolling the stone up the hill. And however, if you don't try to roll it up, things get worse.
But if you don't do that, I mean, I don't think you can do that without being an optimist in some form.
Yeah, and he was in some area of himself, but he was a Scot. He was Scottish.
Yeah.
The Scottish, they tend to be doer. I mean, they tend to have a doer side to them. So there was that side to him. His mother, on the other hand, was this rather buoyant Australian who spoke of Canadians as God's frozen people. he had that sort of we can do it on the one side of himself, and on the other side he had all these Presbyterians. So he did both things were part of him.
Is there a difference between hope and optimism?
I think hope is built in. So
it's the last in Pandora's box. Is that it?
No, not like Camus. He said "Sal espoir" and dirty hope keeps you going, even though you should just give up. So he was much more pessimistic. So you get out of bed in the morning, and you wouldn't do that unless you hoped there was something to get out of bed for, even if it's only breakfast. I shouldn't say only breakfast, because a lot of people don't get breakfast.
That's right.
So even if it's only what is going to happen the next moment. So let us all go back to reading Marcus Aurelius. Yeah. Very tonic, pep you up no end. Why not have hope? What does it cost you to have hope?
I think we should also read.
We
should also read Margaret Atwood's essays coming out in the fall.
Do you think we should do that?
I think we should. Yeah.
Kind of you.
Because I think it's going to open up areas that perhaps we don't know about. Margaret Atwood.
Well, this is a collection, Michael. So if you've been very assiduous in collecting all of these things, which there's buckets of them. So we went through, this many, and then we narrowed them down to that many. My problem is that I have a bad habit of not being able to say no. When people say, "Could you write about this?" Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I just have to get rid of that habit.
Well, please keep saying yes.
No.
Next time we do this, we'll do it in Newfoundland.
Oh, that would be great. Yes, Graham and I hiked to Newfoundland once.
I know.
We hiked all over it, and we discovered the most amazing strawberries. It was strawberry season. You don't think of strawberries in Newfoundland, but on the western part, had these astonishing strawberries. Did you know about them?
I did indeed, and the blueberries and the bears that come after them.
I was thinking more of the strawberry socials, what with the strawberry shortcake.
Yes, exactly. Well, we'll do that as well. Thank you, Margaret. It's always wonderful to talk to you, and you look great.
And you look great. Yes, yes, you look very spiffy indeed.
We've survived. Thank you, my dear. Take care. Thank you.